Do you want to take control of your health? Hear the truth about dieting and weight loss? Learn the best strategies for maintaining a healthy lifestyle? This is the Yossi Muller Show.
And welcome to the show. I'm Yossi Muller.
And I'm Duddy Muller.
Duddy is a chef with a background in nutrition.
Yossi is a nutritionist with, what do you know, a background in nutrition.
Every show we do, we take another myth and debunk it.
We crush it.
Today's topic is so-called proteins. There are many foods that people consider to be protein foods, but are not.
Why do people believe that?
One reason is because the food sounds to them like a protein. It might be similar to other foods that are protein foods.
Right. Perhaps it's marketed as a protein.
Right? Maybe there's someone who wants you to think that it is a protein. Someone who might make a lot of money if you think that that food is a protein. Another reason why these foods are considered to be proteins is because they taste very good.
So you want to eat it?
And you don't want to eat something that is sugar and fat.
Of course not, because that's not healthy.
I mean, you do, but you don't want to believe that the food you're eating is sugar and fat.
Right, because that will make you feel bad.
So what you do is you tell yourself that the food is a protein, and then you get the best of both worlds. You get to eat this very fattening, high in sugar or high in fat food. You get to tell yourself that you're being reasonable.
Right.
After all, you're eating a protein. And you also get to not lose weight, and it's not your fault. And you could blame some other reason for it. The scale is broken.
My metabolism is broken.
Your metabolism is broken. Instead, your brain needs to understand it's not a protein.
It's not a protein? What if it has protein in it? These foods that people believe to be proteins that are not proteins, you're saying they don't have any protein in them?
No, they do have protein, but that doesn't matter because all foods have protein in it.
All foods have protein?
Yeah, any food that exists in the natural world will have protein. There are some highly processed foods like corn syrup that don't have protein in it, but even processed foods, most of them have protein in it. Practically every food in the world, certainly every food that exists in the natural world that nothing was changed to it, has protein in it. So it doesn't really count that it has some protein in it.
Looking at the nutrition information, you see protein. Oh, it has protein. That doesn't make it a protein. It makes it something that has protein.
It makes it a food.
Almost, right, it makes it a food. Everything has protein, basically.
There are some foods that are high in protein, but that also doesn't necessarily make it a protein. What if it has more fat in it than protein? We could hardly call it a protein, can we?
So what would these foods be considered then?
So I'm not a big believer in labeling foods based on whether they are high in fat, carbs, or protein, because that's an oversimplification. This is part of what led people to even make the mistake of assuming that a food is a protein or is a carb. Every food has fat in it. Every food has carbs in it. Every food has protein in it. Calling a food by just one of those labels is oversimplifying. And I want to be clear about something. I'm not knocking diets that divide foods into fat, carbs, and protein.
They are saying something about the food.
Yes, if a food is high in a certain macronutrient is just a term for fat, carbs, or protein. So if a food is high in one of those three,
it might be something you want to avoid or something you might want to lean towards.
Yes, if they divide all foods into these categories and then they give you a number for each one, it can be a practical way for many people to go on a diet. So under the supervision of a nutritionist, it certainly can be an excellent method to lose weight. But it is oversimplifying. It's a good place to start. It's better to know what a food is high in. But these so-called protein foods, if we were going to call them a fat, carb, or protein, we would call them a fat, or we would call them a carb, but not a protein.
Okay, let's get to some examples. Fats. What are examples of foods that are really fats that people believe are proteins?
Steak.
Steak
is 2/3 fat, 1/3 protein. Ground beef is another example.
Even lean ground beef.
They did a very good trick. In fact, people like myself who study how the food industry likes to do tricks on the consumers to fool them into thinking that what they're eating is healthy but isn't. What is widely considered amongst researchers to be the number one trick of all is how the ground beef industry is able to call ground beef that's not at all lean, they're able to call it lean. And it's not lean, they could even call it extra lean if they want. They do a fantastic trick. What they do is they go by percentage weight. So since fat weighs very little, fat weighs a lot less than muscle weighs. Muscle is protein. Protein is muscle.
And that's in your beef, in your ground beef, the protein there is the muscle.
Is the muscle of the animal. And since fat weighs much less than protein, they decided to write that the fat is 20% fat for a typical ground beef, even though it's way more than 20% fat. It's just 20% fat in weight, because fat weighs very little. And then the lean beef, they write that it's 10% fat. Of course, it's way more than 10%. And then the extra lean, they write that it's 5% fat. And of course, it's a lot more than 5% fat. The 5% fat is really 18% fat if you go by calories.
Calories, right?
And the 10% so-called lean ground meat is really a third fat, 33% fat. And typical so-called 80% lean meat, which is 80-20, which is the standard chopped meat, which they write is only 20% fat, is really 2/3 fat, just like steak.
Right.
Another example is ground chicken or ground turkey.
That's not white meat, at least.
Yes, this is especially misleading because generally chicken and turkey on the bone or cutlets is very lean and is certainly what we would consider to be a protein. But when they grind it,
They'll add some fat, or they'll focus on the fattier parts of the chicken.
yeah, of course, if you specify, I want ground white meat chicken or ground chicken tops.
It will be much lower in fat. And that would be primarily a protein, and that is something we're okay with being called a protein.
Even though it has some fat in it, but it's
even
mostly
though-
protein.
And even though calling something a protein isn't necessarily what you want to do, we're okay with that.
Another example is salmon.
Yes. People think salmon is better than gefilte fish.
Yes. How do you know?
How do I know? Because I know people. Gefilte fish has fillers, it's unhealthy, it's not fish really.
Salmon is 3 times as fattening as gefilte fish. Every time I meet someone for the first time and I create their menu plan and we're working on the Shabbos menu, they say, do I have to eat salmon? Or is it okay if I eat gefilte fish? Are you sure?
Right.
Salmon would be better for someone who's limiting their carbs, but most people on diets are limiting their calories. And salmon is certainly not a protein, it's mostly fat. It's healthy fat.
Yeah.
It could be part of a healthy diet.
But even something that's healthy, if you eat too much of it, it's not healthy anymore.
Exactly, and salmon is a food that is very easy to eat too much of because it's over 50 calories per ounce and it's mostly fat. A lot of these fats that people consider proteins has to do with a certain diet that was very popular a few decades ago and is still popular.
At least variations of it.
Yeah, the Atkins diet, which is designed to get people to eat fewer carbs.
Right. Its main focus is to minimize or even completely obliterate carb consumption.
So someone who's uneducated will assume that Atkins diet is based on consuming protein, while it's not. It has nothing to do with protein. It has to do with not eating carbs.
Right. In fact, the diet is really that you avoid the carbs and you exchange those calories for fat primarily. You don't actually change what you would be eating protein-wise.
In fact, you could consume no protein and still lose weight. If you consume calories just from fat, as long as you're not consuming carbs, you will lose weight. Calories could come from carbs, which you're trying to avoid, protein, which you certainly don't need to have on the Atkins diet, fat, which you could have on the Atkins diet, and alcohol, which you could also have on the Atkins diet.
Ooh, sounds like a great diet.
In fact, people who are alcoholics, if you get to know them, you will see that they are consuming 6,000 calories a day, which is way more than you're supposed to, and they're rail thin. How do they manage that? Because they're not consuming any carbs. For those of you who think that alcohol, whiskey has carbs in it, it doesn't. Whiskey and vodka do not have carbs in it, and if someone consumes only whiskey and vodka, even if they're drinking 3 bottles a day, they will be rail thin, because the Atkins diet is about not having carbs.
And the Atkins diet does work. Limiting carbs is a philosophy that leads to weight loss. So they're rail thin because removing carbs can have that effect on the body.
Absolutely. This is another myth. Because people think the Atkins diet has something to do with protein, it has nothing to do with protein. It just has to do with not having carbs. People think that foods like steak, ground beef, and ground turkey,
That they're eating a lot of on the Atkins diet.
yes, and salmon, they think that those foods are proteins. Really, they're just foods that don't have carbs. And where do the calories come from? Fat with some protein. Now, those are fats with some protein in it.
Right. Then you have fats with almost no protein in it, and people will still call it protein.
Yes, for example, cheese.
So you have very few cheeses that are not full of fat. And even the ones that aren't full of fat are still very high in fat, primarily fat, calorie-wise.
And if they're not putting cheese in their sandwich for their protein, they may put in peanut butter. Peanut butter is one of my favorite examples of a food that people consider proteins.
It's not only people, it's the government. Peanut
Yes.
butter for a while was promoted by the health department as a healthy protein to add to a breakfast.
The government has a reason for that because there are some people who are completely undernourished. There are children who don't have any money and don't have any food, and they're eating bread with butter on it or bread with cream cheese. So the government offers, as part of their recommended foods, peanut butter so the kids shouldn't suffer from protein energy malnutrition, which is not an issue for the overwhelming majority of people. And peanut butter certainly isn't a protein. It just has a couple of grams of protein in it, whereas butter and cream cheese don't. So that has to be taken in context. So if you want to annoy your nutritionist, you could do what a lot of my clients do. They show up and gain a tremendous amount of weight. No, they show up and they didn't gain the weight yet because I stopped them from doing what they want to do. But they want to talk about how I'm going to have bread for lunch with peanut butter because bread is my carb and peanut butter is my protein, and that's a balanced meal. Meanwhile, they're going to continue being obese if they think that way because peanut butter has less protein than the bread that you put the peanut butter on.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm assuming you're talking about whole grain bread and not processed white flour bread.
Whole grain bread has double the amount of protein that peanut butter has. And mind you, bread has almost no protein, but even bread has more protein than peanut butter. Whole wheat bread has about double the amount of protein that peanut butter has. And rye bread, even non-whole wheat bread, rye bread has the same amount of protein that peanut butter has.
Wow. And don't confuse grams with percentage of food.
So when someone's looking at a label, they might underestimate what I'm saying. Because when you look at the label can mislead you into thinking that peanut butter actually does have some protein in it. And I'm exaggerating when I say that peanut butter is a fat with just a teeny bit of protein in it. Duddy, how many calories are in a serving of peanut butter?
190 calories per serving.
How much peanut butter is that?
That's not a lot.
So that's a
It's
thin
like
layer.
a thin layer, right?
A thin layer of peanut butter is 190 calories. And if we would look at the label,
16 grams of fat and 8 grams of protein.
right.
So it's double,
It seems like there's only double the amount of fat as there is protein.
but that's not true because fat is much more dense calorie-wise. Each gram of fat has a lot more calories than each gram of protein.
So you're saying that even though there's only double the amount of grams of fat as there are protein,
There are 5 times the amount of calories. 150 calories from fat and only 30 calories from protein.
so you're saying there's 5 times as much fat as there is protein in peanut butter.
Right. So the label is confusing and misleading
If you're uneducated,
if you're measuring by the grams. If you're measuring by the size, relative size, as opposed to the relative calories.
okay, that's important. And so what percentage of peanut butter is protein?
Around 15%.
It's 1/7 of it is protein, 1/7 of it is carbs, the rest of it is fat, which is 5/7.
What about the daily value, the percent daily value? Is that a good way to measure it?
I'm happy you brought that up because that's another thing that confuses people on the label. There's a percentage that's right next to the grams. If you see grams of protein and you look next to it, it says percent.
Percent DV, which stands for daily value.
So don't confuse that with the percentage it is in the food. That's something else entirely. That's just telling you based on the average person how much percent of that type of nutrient you got for the day. That's the daily value, which is the recommended amount based on the day. So if the food says that you got a large amount of your recommended daily value per protein,
That does not mean the food is a protein. It just means it has protein in it.
right. So on peanut butter, the fat is going to say 24% daily value, and the protein is going to say 16% daily value. That doesn't mean that there's almost as much protein as there is fat.
It's just that the government feels that you need less protein per day than you need fat.
Right. And if you look at the carbs, it says 2%. Trust me, it's not because only 2% of this food is carbs. A lot more than 2%, 15% is carbs. So don't confuse the grams or the percent daily value. Don't confuse that with how much protein is in your food. Peanut butter is 15% protein. It means nothing because most foods are a lot more than 15% protein.
Even foods that are known as carbohydrates, such as corn, which is a grain, is still 16% protein.
Absolutely. Speaking of grains, let's talk about carbs with some protein in it.
For example,
Beans, also chickpeas.
These have the added advantage of being known as being healthy.
And they certainly are healthy.
So even the health professionals have a bias towards wanting you to eat these foods.
But don't consider them proteins. They're carbs with some protein in it. Then there are carbs and fat with some protein in it. Meaning the food is carbs and fat, yet somehow people take the protein, which is the
Third highest macronutrient, which is
some people take the protein, which doesn't even come in second place, and manage to convince themselves that these foods are protein foods. And one of them is made out of chickpeas.
hummus.
That's right.
Hummus is a great example because hummus is chickpeas, which we already know is not a protein. It's a carb. And you then added oil and sesame paste and some spices, and there you go. That's your hummus. You literally took a carb, you added fat to it, and now you're calling it a protein.
I loved doing this when I was overweight. There's no better feeling in the world than eating foods that are not good for me, that are delicious, and blaming my weight problem on
Some other issue.
genetics.
Calling it a protein doesn't make it a protein. You're just confusing yourself.
And speaking of calling foods a protein, there are foods that have the name protein in it. Could you imagine? Companies are allowed to manufacture foods, title the name of their product protein, and it's not a protein. And protein doesn't even come in second place. These are carbs and fats together, and the company calls it a protein bar or a protein shake. Could you imagine?
Yes, I don't have to imagine. I've seen them.
This is America, by the way.
Right.
Other countries have laws protecting the consumer from being fooled like this. And I'm not going to say that it's the government's problem. We elect the government. And mind you, most of us Americans love being in denial. We love being lied to, and we love living in this fantasy.
I recently actually was in a store looking at protein bars, and I think I saw 10 protein bars, and 9 of the 10 had almost twice the amount of sugar. Forget about other carbs. Twice the amount of sugar as protein in it.
Right, sugar is just one type of carb. It's a pretty horrible type of carb. But just the sugar, there was twice as much sugar, let alone the other carbs, and let alone the fat content. I want to give one final example with something that is bizarre that people considered it a protein, because you could basically go into a supermarket and take anything you want off the shelf, and every single one of them is going to have more protein in it than this food. This food is a carb, and I don't even believe in calling foods carbs or fats or proteins, but this is one food that I'll make the exception for. It is a carb. It is so high in carbs. It is higher in carbs than any other carb. It has practically no protein, which is saying a lot because all foods have some protein in it, but this one, barely any. Yet, a fair amount of people consider it protein.
What is this food, Yossi?
And some people who don't consider protein, they don't think it's a carb, but they think it's a vegetable. They don't know what it is. They don't identify it properly. This food starts with a Q.
Mm-hmm.
Quinoa.
Quinoa. Why do people make such a drastic mistake in understanding the nutrients of quinoa?
Where do you start? Maybe quinoa doesn't taste as good as rice and potatoes, so it's easier to be fooled into thinking that it's good for you?
Oh, I actually know something about quinoa. The protein in quinoa is what they call a complete protein.
It is a complete protein. That means that it has a high amino acid score. This is not a concern for anyone in the world, especially given that the amount of protein in it is
Negligible.
But it's a way for a marketing team to combine with science to come up with why the protein in it is a better quality protein. It's only a theoretical. I'm not going to get into why it could, in theory, matter, but it doesn't. Regardless, it's not relevant to any of you listeners. The fact that it has a high amino acid score and also the amount is completely inconsequential. So that's a fantastic example.
Quinoa is just as much a carb as any other grain.
Where you're coming from, it's way more carbs than every other grain.
Really?
Yeah, it's more concentrated with carbs than any other grain by far.
Oh, wow. So quinoa is the worst.
Quinoa's healthy.
Quinoa's healthy.
Any food that is not processed is healthy.
But it's still not a protein.
Yeah, it will be very tricky to include in a diet because of how high it is in calories and how high it is in carbs.
Okay, we make this mistake. Many people have these foods that they believe to be proteins and they're not. Who cares? Why does this matter if people believe this? Let them believe it.
This matters because protein is a big factor with weight loss. Protein makes a person full, and protein makes a person's metabolism work faster.
So there are reasons for people to want to eat protein.
Yeah, some diets are designed to limit carbs, and even though you're not required to eat protein, you end up consuming a fair amount of protein. So for such diets, it obviously plays a role. And then diets that limit calories, protein is still a factor.
So if protein is important for us to focus on, what foods are high in protein? What foods are really protein?
Especially if we just ruled out so many.
Right, even quinoa is not a protein, right?
So foods that are high in protein include chicken, eggs, Egg whites are much higher
Right.
than whole eggs, but eggs are high in protein. Lean steak, for example, oyster steak, shoulder London broil, or really any steak that you look at it and you see that there's no white in it.
White is fat, almost always.
Except if it's in white meat chicken and turkey. So ground white meat chicken and turkey, that's high in protein. There are a lot of fish that are high in protein, including tilapia, flounder, tuna steak.
In fish, you have much more white that is not fat. Chicken is more pink. The white in chicken is typically fat as well, until it's cooked. Once it's cooked, it all looks white.
Oh, so if you're looking at a raw piece of chicken,
Yes. For example, the ground white meat chicken turkey, it will not look white. It will be pink. If you see white in your raw chicken, that will be fat,
okay, that's a great tip for people who are trying to buy chicken.
right? But fish, even raw fish, tilapia is white, straight up.
Tuna from a can is a fantastic source of protein.
But it has mercury.
Usually people who have a problem with mercury in the tuna, when I suggest they eat tuna, which is great for them and will help them lose weight and maybe live long enough for mercury to even become a question, people who have issues with mercury typically also have issues with, if I suggest that they have turkey, like a turkey sandwich for lunch, they'll say, what about nitrates? So people who are worried about mercury or nitrates, I would compare that to someone
I have
who has
an example.
Yeah.
I got a new phone and the calendar in it ended in 2078. And I'm thinking in my head that by 2078, I might have to get a new calendar.
Oh,
My phone isn't surviving until then. I'm not worried about the calendar in the phone not going long enough.
and finally, vegetables are a great source of protein. Broccoli, mushrooms, vegetables are a much better source of protein. So the message from today is that protein is very important for a diet.
Yes.
And most foods that people consider to be proteins are not in fact proteins.
They're either fats with some protein or with almost no protein, or they're carbohydrates or a mixture of fat and carbohydrate, but they are not proteins.
And there are foods that are protein, and even those foods typically have some fat in it, but they are nevertheless high in protein, and you have to get to know what these foods are so you can include them in your diet.
Right? Just remember that broccoli is more of a protein than steak.
Because steak is 1/3 protein and 2/3 fat. Broccoli is 1/3 protein and has no fat.
You don't need to focus on if something is a protein, a carb, or a fat for most diets. You want to avoid foods that are carbs, but not foods that are cold carbs, proteins, or fat. You want to know if the food actually is a carb, protein, or fat before you make your decision. And that number is based on the percentage of calories, not weight.
So get to know what foods are good for you and what foods just sound like they're good for you.
And don't get distracted by what something is called.
You've reached the end of this episode.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you join us next time.
Goodbye.